Dr. Lisa worked in a place where touching another person could mean life or death. Not in a romantic way, but in the most serious medical way possible. She was a doctor in the special wing of City General Hospital, where they kept patients with dangerous diseases that could spread just by breathing the same air. Every morning, Lisa would wake up at 5:30 a.m. sharp. She lived alone in a small apartment just 10 minutes from the hospital. Her routine was always the same: coffee, shower, drive to work, and then the most important part of her day, getting dressed for battle. But this wasn't a normal kind of battle. Lisa's armor was a special suit that covered every inch of her body. Looked like something an astronaut might wear, with tubes and filters and a helmet that made her voice sound robotic. This suit was her lifeline, and more importantly, it was her patient's lifeline too. The hospital wing where Lisa worked was like a different world. The walls were pure white, and everything smelled like strong cleaning chemicals. The floors were so clean they reflected the ceiling lights. Every door had multiple locks, and every room had its own air system that wouldn't let germs escape. Lisa had been doing this job for 8 long years. 8 years of seeing people through thick glass windows. 8 years of never feeling another person's skin. 8 years of watching families say goodbye to their loved ones through video calls, because they couldn't risk getting close. Most people would think this job was depressing, but Lisa found something beautiful in it. She was saving lives in the most dangerous situations possible. When other doctors couldn't help, when regular hospitals had to turn patients away, Lisa and her team stepped in. They were like medical superheroes, fighting invisible enemies that could kill thousands if they ever got out. But being a superhero came with a price. Lisa had forgotten what it felt like to shake hands with a colleague. She had forgotten the comfort of a pat on the shoulder when she had a bad day. She had forgotten that humans were meant to touch each other, to connect in ways that go beyond words. Her day would start with checking the patient list. Each name represented a person fighting for their life in complete isolation. Room 201 might have a young teacher who caught something during a school trip overseas. Room 205 might have a grandfather who got sick while helping his family move. Room 210 might have a nurse who caught something from another patient. Lisa would visit each room, but she never really visited them. She would stand outside the glass, looking in at people who were trapped in their own spacesuits or lying in special beds surrounded by machines. She would check their charts, adjust their medications, and talk to them through an intercom system that made every conversation feel like a phone call to outer space. The patients would look at her with eyes that said so much more than words ever could. Some looked scared, like children lost in a big store. Others looked angry, as if they wanted to break through the glass and scream about how unfair life was. A few looked peaceful, like they had accepted their situation and were just waiting to see what happened next. Lisa became an expert at reading people's emotions through their eyes alone. She could tell who was getting better and who was getting bet. Worse, just by looking at how they moved their head or how they blinked. She could sense hope or despair through a piece of glass that might as well have been a wall between 2 different worlds. After work, Lisa would go through another routine. She would spend 30 minutes in a special shower that cleaned off any germs that might have stuck to her. She would put on fresh clothes and drive home, or she would eat dinner alone and watch television shows about people living normal lives. Sometimes, late at night, Lisa would lie in bed and think about her patients. She would wonder what their voices really sounded like without the intercom making them sound like robots. She would wonder what their hands felt like. Were they rough from working outside? Or soft from an office job? Were they warm or cold? Did they shake when they were nervous? But these thoughts would only last for a few minutes before Lisa would remind herself why the rules existed. One mistake, one moment of carelessness, and she could bring a deadly disease home with her. She could spread it to her neighbors, 2 people at the grocery store, to anyone she met. The isolation that protected her patients also protected the entire world. Lisa had built her whole life around these rules. She was known throughout the hospital as the doctor who never made mistakes. Her safety record was perfect. Her colleagues trusted her completely. Her supervisors often used her as an example of how to do the job correctly. But perfection came with a cost that Lisa was just beginning to understand. She had become so good at staying away from people that she had forgotten how to be close to them She had become so focused on following the rules that she had forgotten why the rules existed in the first place, to protect the human connections that make life worth living. Lisa didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. In a way that would challenge everything she believed about medicine, about rules, and about what it truly means to heal another person. Tuesday morning started like every other day for Dr. Lisa. She put on her coffee, checked the weather, and drove to the hospital through the quiet streets. But when she arrived at work and looked at her patient list, she saw a new name that would change everything. David Martinez, age 28, construction worker. David had been brought in the night before. Caught a rare infection while doing volunteer work after a natural disaster in another country. The paperwork said he was helping rebuild schools when he got sick. Lisa had seen cases like this before, but something felt different even before she met him. When Lisa first walked up to David's room, she expected to see what she always saw, a patient lying in bed. Maybe scared, maybe angry, but definitely defeated by the situation. Instead, she found David sitting up, looking right at her through the glass with eyes that seemed to be smiling even though she couldn't see his mouth behind the mask. Most patients would look away when the doctors came by. They would stare at the ceiling or close their eyes, trying to pretend they were somewhere else. But David waved at her like she was an old friend he hadn't seen in years. It was such a simple gesture, but it caught Lisa completely off guard. As days passed, Lisa noticed that David was different from every other patient she had ever treated. While others became quiet and withdrawn, David found ways to stay connected to the world outside his room. He would tap on the glass to get her attention, not in a desperate way, but in a friendly way that made her want to stay longer than she should. By the end of his first week, David had started writing messages on pieces of paper and holding them up to the window. The first one made Lisa laugh out loud, which surprised her because she couldn't remember the last time she had laughed at work. The message said, "Is this how fish feel in aquariums?" Lisa found herself thinking about David's message all day. She realized that he had put into words something she had never thought about before. Her patients weren't just sick people in isolation rooms. They were human beings trapped in glass boxes, watching the world go by without being able to touch it. The next day, Lisa did something she had never done before. She wrote a message back. It said, "At least fish don't have to wear masks." She held it up to the glass, and when David read it, his whole body shook with laughter. Even though Lisa couldn't hear him laugh, seeing his joy made her feel lighter than she had in years. This became their daily routine. David would write something funny or thoughtful, and Lisa would write back. Sometimes they would have entire conversations through the glass, holding up paper after paper like they were texting with handwriting. Other patients and staff started noticing their unusual communication method. David wrote about his life before getting sick. He told her about building houses, about his family, about his dreams of starting his own construction company. Lisa found herself sharing things too, writing about her love of old movies and her fear of roller coasters. It was the first real conversation she had with a patient in 8 years. But David didn't just write messages. He would sing songs, and even though Lisa couldn't hear him clearly through the glass and intercom, she could see his passion. He would move his hands like he was conducting an orchestra, and his eyes would light up with each song. He told her through his messages that music helped him stay positive. Lisa started looking forward to her visits to David's room. She would save his room for last during her rounds, like saving dessert for the end of a meal. She would spend extra time there, much longer than she spent with other patients. Her colleagues began to notice, but they didn't say anything because David was clearly getting better. It was a strange thing about David's case. Medically, he was responding well to treatment. His infection was clearing up faster than expected. But more importantly, his spirit seemed to be getting stronger every day. While other patients became depressed and withdrawn during isolation, David somehow managed to stay cheerful and engaged. Lisa started researching David's condition more carefully. She wanted to understand why he was recovering so well, when other patients with similar infections often struggled for weeks or months. The medical journals talked about the importance of mental health in recovery, but Lisa had never seen it so clearly demonstrated. She began to realize that David's refusal to be isolated, even while being physically separated, was actually helping him heal. His determination to stay connected to other people, even through glass and paper messages, was keeping his spirit alive, and somehow his spirit was helping his body fight the infection. Lisa also noticed something happening to herself. For the first time in years, she was excited to go to work. She found herself thinking about David's messages during her lunch breaks and wondering what song he might be singing. She started buying different colored pens so her messages would be more interesting to read. But as David's condition improved, Lisa began to worry about something else. Soon, he would be healthy. Enough to leave the isolation unit. Soon, their daily conversations would end. Soon, she would go back to her routine of seeing patients through glass without any real connection. The thought of losing this unexpected friendship made Lisa realize something important. David hadn't just refused to be isolated, he had shown her that she had been isolating herself too. For 8 years, she had been the one trapped behind glass, watching life happen without being able to touch it. David had been in isolation for exactly 14 days when everything changed. Lisa arrived at the hospital that morning feeling unusually anxious. She had tossed and turned all night, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. Instincts, developed over 8 years of working with critically ill patients, were telling her to pay attention. When she reached David's room, her heart sank. The man who had spent 2 weeks filling the sterile halls with silent songs and cheerful messages was lying completely still on his bed. His eyes were open, but they were staring at nothing. The spark that had made him so different from every other patient was gone. Lisa checked his medical chart through the computer system outside his room. His vital signs were actually improving. His infection levels were dropping. By every medical measure, David was getting better. But anyone looking at him could see that something essential had died inside him. Ouch. She tapped on the glass gently, the way she had done so many times before. David didn't move. She tapped louder. Still nothing. Spoke into the intercom, calling his name softly at first, then with more urgency. David's eyes didn't even flicker toward her voice. This wasn't a medical emergency in the traditional sense. David wasn't dying from his infection, but Lisa could see that he was dying from something else entirely. The isolation that was meant to protect him had finally broken his spirit. After 14 days of being separated from human touch, David had simply given up. Lisa had seen this before, in other patients, but never with someone who had fought so hard to stay connected. She had watched strong people crumble under the weight of isolation, but David had seemed different. It seemed unbreakable. Seeing him like this felt like watching a candle flame get blown out by a wind that came from nowhere. She stood outside his room for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The hallway was quiet except for the humming of air filters and the distant beeping of machines. Lisa found herself thinking about all the conversations they had shared through glass. All the messages written on scraps of paper, all the times David had made her laugh when she didn't think she could. The medical textbooks had taught Lisa about the importance of mental health and recovery, but they had never prepared her for this moment. They had never told her what to do when following the rules meant watching a patient's soul disappear. They had never explained how to balance safety with the basic human need for connection. Lisa thought about her 8 years of perfect safety records. She thought about the trust her colleagues had placed in her. She thought about the hundreds of patients she had successfully treated while maintaining every protocol. She thought about the system that had kept everyone safe for so long. But then she thought about David's messages. She thought about his songs that she couldn't hear but could feel. She thought about the way he had waved at her like an old friend on that first day. She thought about how he had taught her that connection was possible even through barriers, and how he had shown her that she had been isolating herself too. The decision came quietly, like a whisper in her mind, rather than a shout. Lisa knew that medically David was no longer highly contagious. His infection levels had dropped to the point where the risk was minimal. She also knew that if she didn't do something now, she might lose him to a different kind of sickness entirely. Lisa walked to the equipment room and began the process. She had done thousands of times in reverse. Instead of putting on her protective gear, she started taking it off. Each piece that came off felt significant, like she was removing armor that had protected her but also separated her from the world. First came the outer gloves, then the face shield, then the protective gown. With each piece of equipment she removed, Lisa felt more vulnerable, but also more human. She was breaking every rule she had followed for 8 years, but she was also following a deeper rule about what it means to be a healer. When she finally stood outside David's room wearing only her regular hospital clothes, Lisa felt terrified and exhilarated at the same time. She had never been in a patient's room without full protection. She had never breathed the same air as someone with a dangerous infection. But she had also never felt more certain that she was doing the right thing. Lisa opened the door and stepped. Inside, the room felt different without barriers between them. The air was warm and still, and she could hear David's breathing clearly for the first time. She could smell the hospital soap and the lingering scent of the flowers that someone had sent but couldn't deliver. She walked slowly to David's bedside. His eyes were still staring at the ceiling, but something in his breathing changed. Lisa reached out and gently took his hand. His skin was warm and slightly rough from years of construction work. It was the first time she had touched a patient's skin in 8 years. The moment their skin made contact, David turned his head. When their eyes met, Lisa saw him come back from wherever he had gone. The spark that had made him special returned like a light being switched on. For 20 minutes, Lisa sat with David, holding his hand and talking to him like one human being to another. She told him about her fears and her loneliness, told her about his dreams and his gratitude. They talked about music and movies and the simple pleasure of human touch. It was the most real conversation either of them had experienced in weeks. When Lisa finally left David's room, she knew that everything had changed. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She had chosen compassion over protocol, and now she would have to face the consequences of that choice. Lisa barely slept that night. She kept thinking about David's hand in hers, about the warmth of real human contact after so many years of barriers. But she also kept thinking about the security cameras that watched every corner of the hospital. She knew that somewhere in the building there was video footage of her entering David's room without protection. The next morning, Lisa arrived at work trying to act normal. She went through her usual routine of checking patient charts and preparing for rounds. But at 9:30 a.m., her phone buzzed with a message that made her heart sink. "Please report to Dr. Wilson's office immediately." Dr. Wilson was the head of the infectious disease department and Lisa's direct supervisor. He was a kind man who had mentored Lisa throughout her career, but he was also someone who believed strongly in following protocols. Lisa had always respected him, and she knew that what she was about to face would be one of the hardest conversations of her life. When Lisa walked into Dr. Wilson's office, she saw that he wasn't alone. The hospital's risk management director was there, along with someone from the legal department. This wasn't going to be a simple conversation between colleagues. This was going to be a formal investigation. Dr. Wilson looked tired, like he had been dealing with this situation all night. He gestured for Lisa to sit down, and she noticed that he couldn't quite meet her eyes. On his desk was a tablet displaying frozen security footage that showed Lisa entering David's room without protective equipment. "Lisa," Dr. Wilson began, his voice heavy with disappointment, "I've known you for 8 years. In all that time, you've never given me a reason to question your judgment. Your safety record has been perfect. Your dedication to protocols has been an example for everyone in this department." Lisa nodded, knowing that everything he said was true. She had been a model employee, someone who other doctors looked up to, but she also knew that none of that mattered now. "Help me understand what happened," Dr. Wilson continued. "The footage shows you entering a patient's room without any protective equipment. You stayed there for 20 minutes. This isn't just a small mistake, Lisa. This is a complete violation of everything we do here." Lisa had rehearsed what she would say during the sleepless night, but now that the moment was here, she found herself struggling to find the right words. How could she explain that she had made a calculated decision based on David's medical condition? How could she make them understand that sometimes healing required more than just medical treatment? "David was dying," Lisa said finally. "Not from his infection, but from the isolation. I've seen it before, but never with someone who had fought so hard to stay connected. His vital signs were improving, but he had given up. He wasn't responding. to anything, the risk management director leaned forward. Dr. Lisa, we understand that isolation is difficult for patients, but we have psychologists and social workers who are trained to deal with these situations. What you did put not just yourself at risk, but potentially everyone in this hospital. Lisa knew they were right from a policy standpoint. The protocols existed for good reasons. One mistake could lead to an outbreak that could affect hundreds of people. But she also knew that David's recovery had accelerated dramatically after their contact. Within hours of her visit, he had been alert and engaging with staff again. I understand the risks, Lisa said. But I also understand that David's infection levels had dropped to the point where the risk was minimal. I made a medical judgment based on his condition and his psychological state. Dr. Wilson shook his head. Lisa, you know that's not how this works. We don't make individual decisions about when protocols apply and when they don't. The system works because everyone follows the same rules every time, without exception. The investigation continued for hours. Lisa answered questions about her decision-making process, her assessment of David's condition, and her understanding of the hospital's policies. She was honest about everything, never trying to minimize what she had done or make excuses for her actions. During a break in the questioning, Lisa was allowed to call her union representative. The conversation was brief and not encouraging. Similar cases in other hospitals had resulted in doctors losing their licenses. Even if Lisa kept her job, she would likely face suspension and mandatory retraining. Meanwhile, word of Lisa's situation had spread throughout the hospital. Her colleagues were shocked. Some were supportive, understanding that she had acted out of compassion. Others were angry, feeling that she had put everyone at risk and damaged the reputation of their department. The most difficult part came when Lisa was told that she would need to be tested for infection every day for the next 2 weeks. Irony wasn't lost on her. She was now the one in isolation, waiting to see if her decision had put her own health at risk. As the investigation continued, something unexpected began to happen. David, who was now recovering quickly, requested to speak with the hospital administration. Despite the hospital's reluctance to involve a patient in a personnel matter, they agreed to let him give a statement. David's statement was simple but powerful. He explained that he had been ready to give up, that the isolation had broken his spirit in a way that no infection could. He described Lisa's visit as the moment. He decided to fight for his life instead of just waiting to see what happened. Other patients from the isolation ward began coming forward too. They shared stories about the psychological impact of complete separation from human contact. They talked about depression, anxiety, and the feeling of being forgotten by the world. Outside their rooms, Lisa's case was becoming about more than just one doctor's decision. It was opening up a conversation about the balance between safety and compassion in medical care. Medical journals were being consulted and experts were being brought in to discuss the role of human connection in healing. But none of that changed the fact that Lisa had broken fundamental rules. The medical board that would decide her fate was scheduled to meet in 2 weeks. Until then, Lisa was suspended from patient care, spending her days in meetings with lawyers and reviewing hospital policies. The hardest part was the uncertainty. Lisa didn't know if she would be able to continue practicing medicine. She didn't know if her decision to help one patient would end her career of helping many. All she knew was that when she looked back on that moment in David's room, she still believed she had made the right choice.